Della Monroe tugged her oversized hoodie tighter as the gate announcement echoed through the crowded airport lounge, but she didn't move. Her flight to Chicago was delayed again, third time today. She sighed and leaned back against the stiff leather chair, pushing her carry-on closer to her feet. She didn't notice the man who sat down in the empty seat beside her, nor the way his expensive coat brushed her arm. She was too busy running numbers in her head. If she didn't land a client by next week, she'd have to sublet her already tiny apartment. Freelance design work wasn't exactly paying the bills like she'd hoped. Della rubbed her temple and pulled out her sketchbook, flipping past pages of logo mock-ups and half-done branding concepts. "You always draw in airports," the deep voice threw her for a second. She turned to find a man watching her, one brow slightly raised, his sharp features softened by a warm smile. His suit looked like it cost more than her monthly rent, and the watch on his wrist definitely wasn't from a department store. His hair was a touch too perfect, like he'd just walked off a magazine shoot. Della blinked. "Only when I'm trying not to lose my mind," he chuckled. "Then you must be close to the edge." She really laughed for the first time in days. "You have no idea. I'm Arden Fletcher." He offered his hand, she shook it. "Della Monroe." "Della," he repeated like he was trying the word on for size. "Nice to meet you," she nodded, then turned back to her sketchbook. She wasn't in the mood to flirt with a stranger, even if he did smell like cedarwood and quiet confidence. "You heading to Chicago?" he asked. She hesitated, then looked at him again. "Yeah, you," he nodded. "Business. Of course it was." He looked like the type who probably had people waiting to pick him up in a black SUV and a penthouse office downtown. She narrowed her eyes. "Let me guess. Finance?" he grinned. "Close. Real estate development." She gave him a look. "That's basically finance in a hard hat." He laughed again, and somehow the sound made her heart stutter. It was warm, real. She flipped her book closed. "What kind of development?" Arden leaned back in his chair. "Luxury properties, hotels, resorts." "A couple of shopping plazas." Della's eyes widened despite herself. "That explains the watch," he glanced at it. "This old thing," she shook her head, but she was smiling. "What about you?" he asked. "Design," she blinked. "How did you—" "The sketchbook, the way you're holding the pen." "And the fact that you've been frowning at the same page for 15 minutes. She laughed again, a little embarrassed. "I do branding, logos, packaging, stuff like that. Freelance?" "Yeah," he looked impressed. "That takes guts," Della shrugged. "Takes bills." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the hum of the airport around them. She felt oddly calm beside him, like the chaos of her day had paused. "You know," he said, "I've been trying to redesign the logo for one of my new boutique hotels in Miami." She raised an eyebrow. "Are you seriously pitching me a job in an airport lounge?" He tilted his head. "Maybe you any good?" She met his eyes. "I'm great." "Then yeah," he said, "I'm pitching you." She stared at him for a beat, but he didn't look like he was joking. "You don't even know my portfolio. Send it to me. If I like it, we'll talk." He handed her a sleek black business card. The gold lettering read, "Arden Fletcher, CEO, Fletcher Properties." Della stared at it, then at him. "Wait, you're that Fletcher?" His smile was slow. "Depends which one you've heard of." She blew out a breath. "You're on the cover of that luxury business mag every other month." "Guilty." She shook her head again. "You're a millionaire." He leaned closer, his voice low. "Does that make you nervous?" "No," she said honestly, "but it makes this conversation a lot weirder." "Why?" She gestured between them. "Because I'm wearing a hoodie with coffee stains and you probably flew here in a private jet." He glanced at her hoodie. "I like it. Makes you look like a real person." "Well," she said, "that's good because I am one." He laughed again, full and easy. She liked the way his eyes crinkled when he did. Their flight was delayed another hour, but neither of them noticed. They talked about everything: music, cities they loved, the worst coffee they'd ever had. Della found herself leaning in without realizing it, forgetting the sketchbook in her lap or the stress in her chest. Eventually, the gate agent called their flight. Arden stood and offered his hand. "Come on, Miss Monroe. Let's get you to Chicago." She slipped her hand into his and something in her chest fluttered. The walk to the gate felt like a strange dream. They didn't sit together on the flight. He was in first class, of course, and she was in row 24, but when the plane touched down, he was waiting near baggage claim. "You hungry?" he asked. She blinked, surprised. "I know a place," he added. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. I could eat." They rode in the back of a sleek black car, the city lights flashing around them. The restaurant was tucked into a high rise, all glass and soft lighting. A waiter pulled out her chair. Arden ordered for them both, like he'd done this 100 times. And yet, he looked at her like he hadn't seen anything quite like her before. Halfway through dinner, he leaned forward. "I meant it about the logo. Send me your work." She smiled. "I will." "And I meant it about you being great," he added. Della looked down, cheeks burning. "You barely know me." He lifted his wine glass. "Not yet." They toasted, the sound of crystal catching in the air. By the end of the night, she didn't care that her hoodie wasn't designer or that she still had rent to figure out. Because for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. And Arden Fletcher, he couldn't take his eyes off her. The next morning, Della stared at her inbox while her untouched coffee cooled beside her. She had barely slept, too wired from the surreal events of the night before. It wasn't every day a man like Arden Fletcher offered you a job over dinner in a rooftop restaurant with velvet chairs and a wine list thicker than a dictionary. She clicked send on the email containing her portfolio and tried to ignore the way her hands trembled. Her studio apartment was still dark, lit only by the pale gray outside her curtainless window. She hadn't bothered decorating since moving in 6 months ago. Rent in Chicago was brutal, and whatever energy she had went into fighting for clients, not hanging art. She rubbed her eyes and forced herself to focus. As she opened a new file for a branding mock-up she'd been assigned last week, her phone rang. Unknown number. Her stomach flipped. "Hello, Della Monroe." She recognized Arden's voice instantly, but it was crisper, now businesslike. "This is Arden Fletcher," he continued. "I just went through your portfolio," her breath caught. "And I want to offer you a contract for 6 weeks, weekly deliverables. You'll be working closely with my creative director and me. Rate is negotiable." She blinked. "Wait, just like that? You're talented. I don't waste time when I see something that works." She gripped the edge of her desk. "Okay, yes, I'd love to. I'll have legal send over the paperwork by noon," he said. "And Della," she paused. "Yeah, I'm not doing this as a favor." "You earned it." After the call ended, she sat in silence for nearly a full minute before letting out a breathless laugh. Then she grabbed the mug of cold coffee and poured herself a fresh cup. By noon, the contract landed in her inbox, along with a calendar invite for a meeting at the Fletcher Properties headquarters the following morning. She stared at the address, an office tower on the Gold Coast. It was a far cry from local cafes, with flickering lights and clients who paid in late Venmo transfers. She didn't own anything remotely resembling business attire, but with the first installment of her new rate already deposited into her account, she made a trip to a boutique she'd passed a dozen times but never dared enter. The saleswoman took one look at her and brought out 3 suits, 2 silk blouses, and a pair of heels that made her feel like she belonged in a boardroom instead of a cramped studio. She left the store with a bag she couldn't stop staring at, and for the first time in months, she didn't worry about how she'd pay rent. The next morning, she stepped into the mirrored lobby of Fletcher Properties and gave her name to the receptionist, who directed her to the 32nd floor. The elevator ride felt endless, her reflection staring back at her from the polished chrome walls. When the doors opened, she stepped into a space that felt more like an art gallery than an office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, and modern sculptures lined the hallway. A woman in a sleek navy dress approached with a tablet in hand. "You must be Della Monroe. Mr. Fletcher is expecting you." She led Della to a glass-walled conference room. Arden stood at the head of the long oak table, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, tie loosened just enough to look deliberate. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, something flickered in his expression, something softer than professionalism. "Glad you made it." "Thanks for the opportunity," she said, taking a seat across from him. He nodded. "You'll be working on the branding for our new London property." It's a high-end boutique hotel, minimalist aesthetic, but with a strong local identity. We want something bold, nothing safe. She opened her laptop. "Do you have a name yet?" His gaze met hers. "That's part of what you'll help decide." A few minutes later, his creative director arrived, an elegant woman named Camille who didn't waste time with small talk. They dove into strategy, target demographics, and mood boards. Della held her own, pitching several angles while sketching out ideas directly onto her tablet. When she showed them the rough concepts she'd prepared based on the vague notes from the night before, Camille raised an eyebrow. "You did this already?" Della nodded. Arden leaned forward. "You weren't kidding when you said you were great." Camille gave a rare smile. "Looks like you'll fit in." The meeting ran over by an hour. When Camille finally left, Arden lingered behind. "You surprised her," he said, walking with her toward the elevator. Della glanced at him. "That a good thing? She's not easily impressed." They reached the elevator bank and Della pressed the down arrow. He studied her for a beat. "You free this evening?" She blinked. "For what?" "There's a gallery opening I have to attend. It's related to the hotel's art partnerships." "Thought you might want to see the design inspiration in person." She hesitated. "Is this a work thing or a different thing?" He tilted his head. "Do you want it to be a different thing?" The elevator arrived. She stepped inside but held the door with her hand. "I'll come," she said. "But only if you let me ask 10 questions about your worst design choices over the years." He laughed. "Deal." That evening, she stood in front of a canvas the size of a garage door while a waiter placed a glass of champagne in her hand. Arden appeared a second later, dressed in a tailored suit that probably had its own insurance policy. "You clean up well," he said as he handed her a small black envelope. "What's this?" "Your access pass for later. There's a private rooftop exhibit." She raised an eyebrow. "Is this part of the tour?" "It's where the best pieces are." As they moved through the gallery, Della asked her questions, half serious, half teasing, and Arden answered everyone, including an embarrassing story about a pre-Fletcher logo that accidentally resembled a plumbing supply store. By the time they reached the rooftop, the skyline was glowing in every direction and string lights crisscrossed above them like stars. "This is beautiful," she said, her voice quieter now. He stood beside her, hands in his pockets. "I thought you'd like it." She turned to him. "You're not what I expected." He looked at her then, his voice low. "Neither are you." Her breath caught, and for a moment the noise of the city faded beneath the weight of his gaze. Then someone called his name from across the terrace, and the spell broke. He looked apologetic. "I'll be right back." She nodded, but as he walked away, her heart thudded with something new, because for the first time in a long while, Della wasn't just fighting to survive. She was starting to want something more. The following week moved at a pace Della hadn't experienced since college finals. Between meetings with Arden's team, design deadlines, and navigating the unspoken rules of Fletcher Properties' world of sharp suits and sharper expectations, she barely had time to breathe, let alone overanalyze the way her pulse shifted every time Arden leaned close during a presentation, or the way his gaze always lingered a second longer than necessary. Late Friday afternoon, as the office began to empty for the weekend, Arden appeared at her desk with 2 espresso cups in hand and an expression she hadn't seen before, unreadable, like he was balancing too many thoughts at once. "Walk with me." She glanced at her screen. "I have a few revisions left, they can wait." His tone was light but final. She stood, slipping her blazer off the back of her chair and following him down the hallway. He didn't speak until they stepped into the private elevator at the end of the corridor, the one none of the other executives ever used when she was around. The doors closed, and he handed her one of the cups. "I wanted to show you something." "Is it the rooftop again?" she teased, taking a cautious sip. "Higher." The elevator stopped at the penthouse level floor 40, a space she hadn't known existed. The doors opened to a glass-walled lounge with views that stretched over the entire city. Sleek black floors, a fireplace carved into a slab of marble, and a long bar of polished walnut lined one side. Not a single desk in sight. "This is where I work when I don't feel like pretending the rest of the building exists," he said, already moving toward the windows. She followed, stunned. "This is ridiculous," he glanced at her. "Good ridiculous," she nodded, walking toward the edge where the city glowed beneath them in late afternoon haze. "I've never seen Chicago like this. It feels like we're above it all." "That's the problem," he murmured. She turned. "What do you mean?" He leaned against the glass. "It's easy to forget what things look like from the ground." Della studied him. He looked tired, not in the physical sense, but as if he'd been dragging something unseen for a long time. "I don't think you forget," she said. "I think you just stop looking." His eyes lifted to hers, something unreadable flashing across his face. "You're not what I expected when I offered you that job. You say that like I've disappointed you." "No," he said, voice quiet. "You've reminded me of things I didn't realize I missed." Silence stretched between them. The air suddenly felt charged. She looked away. "You didn't bring me up here just to admire the view." "You're right." He walked to a low cabinet along the far wall and opened it, revealing a series of large printed boards. He carried them over and spread them across the glass coffee table. "The hotel in London," he said. "This is the space. Construction's nearly finished. I'm flying there next week to walk the property." She crouched beside the table, eyes scanning the architectural renderings. "These are stunning. You should see it in person." She looked up slowly. "Are you asking me to come with you? You're the lead on the branding now. You need to see the space. Experience the city." Her heart beat faster, but she kept her voice even. "You're flying me to London for work. I'm flying you to London because you belong in the room when decisions are made. And also because I want you there." That last part landed heavier than the rest. She stood, uncertain. "Arden." "I know," he said quickly. "It's complicated, is it?" she asked, tilting her head. "Because from where I'm standing it just feels blurred." He nodded slowly. "Maybe that's the problem." She crossed her arms. "We work together, you're my client. I'm also a man who hasn't stopped thinking about you since that airport." That stopped her. He stepped closer, the city lights behind him casting half his face in shadow. "You make this place feel less hollow. You challenge me. You don't tiptoe around me like everyone else does. I don't want to pretend that doesn't mean something." She inhaled sharply. "If this is going to be anything real, it can't be about favors or power. It can't be about who signs the checks," he nodded. "Then let's make it about something else." Her voice was quiet. "Like what?" He took one more step closer. "Like the way you looked at me when you said I'd stopped seeing the ground." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence that followed didn't feel empty, it felt suspended, like something vital was about to happen. Then her phone buzzed from her blazer pocket, shattering the moment. She stepped back, pulling it out. A message from Camille asking about the updated logo files. "I should get back to work," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Arden nodded, stepping aside without protest. "We leave Tuesday. I'll have my assistant book your ticket." She paused in the elevator doorway. "This isn't going to be simple." "No," he said. "But nothing worth it ever is." As the doors closed between them, Della leaned against the mirrored wall, her reflection looking back with wide eyes and a mouth pressed into a thin line. Above the city, on the 40th floor of a tower she never imagined entering, something had shifted. And she wasn't sure if she was falling for the man, or the way he made her feel seen in a world that usually looked the other way. The sky over London was a soft, smoky gray when Della stepped out of the car and looked up at the hotel. Arden wasn't beside her. He'd flown in earlier for a board meeting, but his driver had met her at Heathrow with a placard, and a quiet efficiency that made her feel like she'd stepped into a different version of her own life. The building itself was a contradiction of history and steel. A 19th-century facade wrapped around a glass core, like something out of a film. Inside, the lobby was still unfinished scaffolding along the back wall, the smell of fresh paint lingering in the air, but even in its raw state, it pulsed with possibility. A woman in a tailored coat greeted her at the entrance with a clipboard and a soft British accent. "You must be Miss Monroe. Mr. Fletcher asked us to give you full access. He'll join you shortly." Della nodded, adjusting the strap of her portfolio bag as she stepped into the elevator. The doors closed with a quiet whisper, her heart wild beneath her blouse. By the time she reached the top floor, the rooftop suite that would serve as the hotel's crown jewel, she wasn't thinking about branding anymore. She was thinking about Arden, how close they'd stood in his office, how his voice had dipped when he told her she'd made him feel less hollow. She hadn't answered him then. Not really. She stepped into the suite and stopped. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a skyline of spires and slate rooftops. The walls were bare, the furniture not yet delivered, but light flooded the space with an almost reverent hush. She crossed to the terrace and pushed open the doors. The wind lifted her hair as she stepped outside, her hands resting on the stone railing. "Breathtaking, isn't it?" She turned. Arden stood in the doorway, his coat unbuttoned, his tie gone. He looked like he'd been up for hours, and yet there was something softer about him today, less guarded. "I didn't expect you for another hour," she said. "I moved the meeting," he replied. "Didn't want you to see this place without someone to catch your reaction." She laughed under her breath. "Is that part of the job description?" "No," he said, stepping closer. "That part's just for me." She looked back at the view. "This place is going to be incredible. Only if you finish what you started." "Camille said your updated concepts were stronger than anything that's ever come out of our internal team." Della raised an eyebrow. She actually admitted that. It was more of a reluctant nod, but yes. She smiled, then looked at him. "Why did you really bring me here, Arden?" He didn't answer right away. He walked to the edge of the terrace and rested his hands on the railing beside hers. "Because I wanted you to see what your work could become. What's possible when you stop waiting for someone to let you in and start walking through the door yourself." She turned toward him. "Is that how you did it?" "No," he said quietly. "I bulldozed the door and then I locked it behind me." Della frowned. "Why?" "Because letting people in meant letting them see the cracks. The parts of me that weren't polished or profitable." She watched him carefully. "And now," he said, meeting her gaze, "I'm standing on a rooftop in London realizing that the one person I want to share this with is someone I met in an airport lounge." Her heart thudded hard. "I've spent years building things," he continued. "Buildings, brands, walls. But none of it means anything if I don't have someone who sees more than the surface." She didn't speak. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a rough concept she hadn't shown Camille yet. She handed it to him. He unfolded the paper, frowning slightly as he took it in. A minimalist emblem, 2 interlocking forms, one angular, one curved, separate but not disconnected, below it the hotel's name in bold serif. He looked up. "It's about balance," she said. "Structure and softness, precision and warmth, like this place, like you." He stared at her. "You designed this after seeing the space?" "No," she said. "I drew it on the plane." Something shifted in his expression. He folded the paper carefully, then tucked it into his coat pocket like it was something precious. Then he reached for her hand. "I'm not asking for a future you haven't agreed to," he said. "But I'm asking for something real, something we don't have to hide behind business meetings and branding decks." Della's fingers curled into his. "I'm not afraid of something real." "I am," he admitted. She squeezed his hand. "Then let's be afraid together." He laughed softly, and for the first time she saw the man beneath the empire. Not the millionaire, not the CEO, just Arden, just a man who had been waiting for something he hadn't known how to ask for. Later that night, in a quiet corner of a private dining room overlooking the Thames, he reached across the table and brushed her wrist with his thumb. "I never believed in fate," he said, "but I do believe in timing. And I think the universe sat you beside me for a reason." Della looked at him, her voice steady. "Then let's not waste it." He raised his glass. "To second chances in strange places, They toasted and she leaned back in her chair, warmth spreading in her chest, not from the wine. Not from the lights, but from the quiet certainty that whatever came next, London, Chicago, or somewhere else entirely, she wouldn't be facing it alone. The man beside her had fallen, not for the designer in her portfolio, not for the woman who could elevate his brand, but for the person who hadn't tried to impress him in that airport lounge. The woman who'd been tired, honest, and unafraid to tell him he was wrong. And she had fallen, too, for the man who'd looked at her like she mattered more than a skyline. They didn't need promises that night. They only needed each other. And in that quiet, golden space between what had been and what was coming, they found the beginning of everything. The rain began just as they landed back in Chicago. Neither of them seemed to mind. Arden had glanced out the jet's window with the faint trace of a smile before helping Della down the steps of the plane. A sleek car waited on the tarmac, but he didn't rush. They moved slowly, deliberately, as if taking one step at a time let the weight of everything between them settle into something real. Inside the car, the quiet wasn't awkward. It was full. Della's phone buzzed once in her bag. She didn't reach for it. Arden glanced over. Camille's already prepping the launch deck. She'll want a final logo sign-off by tomorrow. Della folded her hands in her lap. She'll have it. I'll finalize the package tonight. He tilted his head toward her. You could take the weekend. I don't want to. He didn't question her. They pulled up to her building, and she reached for the door handle, but his hand touched her elbow gently. I know we said we wouldn't rush anything, he said, but I don't want to take you back to your apartment and pretend we didn't just fall into something that changed everything. She kept her gaze steady. What are you saying? I bought a building last year in Lincoln Park. It was supposed to be a long-term investment. I didn't even look at the top floor until last month, but I've been renovating it, quietly. I thought I was doing it for resale or maybe for myself someday. And now, I want to show it to you. Della hesitated. Are you asking me to move in? No, he said. I'm asking you to see it, that's all. If it feels like something more after that, we'll talk about it. She nodded slowly. Okay. He leaned forward and told the driver the new address. The building was a narrow, ivy-covered brownstone tucked between modern glass towers. It wasn't flashy. It didn't scream Fletcher Properties. But inside, the elevator opened directly into a sunlit space with exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a kitchen that looked untouched. The view overlooked a small courtyard with trees just beginning to bloom. Della walked the length of the space without speaking, then she turned to him. You renovated this yourself, with a team, he said, but every tile, every finish I signed off. She studied the room again. It's warm. Personal? I didn't want it to feel like one of my projects. I wanted it to feel like a place someone could live in without adjusting who they were. Her voice was quiet. It feels that way. He stepped closer. I meant what I said in London. I don't want to hide this in the folds of our work life. You've changed things for me, Della. I've spent years surrounded by people who only see me for what I can build or what I can buy. You never looked at me that way. She looked up at him. That's because I saw you before I knew who you were. That's why I trust you. A beat passed between them, full of breath and steady heartbeats. What if I'm not ready to move in? She said. Then I'll wait. She touched his chest, fingers brushing the fabric of his shirt. What if I am? Then I'll take you shopping for a key tonight. Her eyes glinted. You already have one made, don't you? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. They shared a look that said more than words could about timing, about trust, about two people who had collided by accident but stayed by choice. Later that evening, Della sat barefoot on the floor of the brownstone's living room, her laptop balanced on her knees, finalizing the logo. Arden handed her a glass of wine and joined her, cross-legged, hair damp from the shower, sleeves rolled. I've never done this before, she said. Designed a logo? No, she said, glancing at him. Let someone in. He looked at her with something like awe. Then I am the luckiest man alive. She clicked send, the logo file off to Camille, and closed her laptop. Done, she said. With work, she leaned into his shoulder. With pretending this is temporary. He wrapped his arm around her. Then let's make it permanent. A few days later, Fletcher Properties hosted a private launch gala for the London Hotel at the Rookery. The ballroom was dressed in soft gold light and linen-draped tables. The new logo was projected high on the wall behind the main stage, bold and clean, exactly as Della had imagined it. Camille gave a short, efficient speech. Arden followed with a few words of his own, less rehearsed, more personal. Then he stepped away from the microphone and walked through the crowd until he reached Della. He didn't speak right away, just reached for her hand and guided her onto the stage. There were murmurs, flashes of surprise, but he didn't falter. "I've made a lot of deals," he said, voice carrying through the room. "Closed a lot of projects, but nothing I've done, not a building, not a brand has meant more to me than what I found when I met this woman." Della's throat tightened. She turned a sketchbook into a future. "Gave me back something I didn't know I'd lost. And tonight, I want to ask her something, not as a CEO, not as a client, but as a man who's never been more certain of anything." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. Gasps rippled through the room. Della's breath caught. He opened it inside, a ring, simple and elegant, a single emerald-cut diamond set in a band of platinum. "Della Monroe," he said, "will you marry me?" The world tilted. She took a breath and stepped forward, her voice steady. "Only if you promise never to sit next to anyone else in an airport ever again," he laughed, eyes glinting. "I swear it," she nodded. "Then yes." The applause was deafening, but Della only saw him. They kissed and the crowd faded away. Months later, on a warm September evening, they stood in the garden of the Lincoln Park brownstone, bathed in soft light and laughter, as they said their vows in front of 50 people who mattered. Della wore a dress with hand-stitched embroidery she'd designed herself. Arden wore a midnight blue suit and a look that said he still couldn't believe she was real. They danced under string lights, barefoot by the end of the night, her hair loose, his tie abandoned. And when the last guest left and the quiet returned, Arden carried Della over the threshold of the place they now called home. He set her down gently. "You're everything," he whispered. She touched his face. "And you're my beginning." They stayed like that, wrapped in each other, the future wide open, no more walls, no more pretending, just love, real, permanent, theirs.